John Wilkes Booth was born on May 10, 1838, in a modest four-room log cabin on a 150-acre tobacco and wheat farm near Bel Air, Harford County, Maryland, a picturesque area of gently rolling hills, dense oak and hickory forests, and fertile valleys that supported the region's agrarian economy, as the ninth of 10 children to Junius Brutus Booth, a world-renowned British Shakespearean actor born in London in 1796, who had achieved stardom at Drury Lane Theatre before eloping to America in 1821. With his mistress Mary Ann Holmes, Booth's mother, a former flower seller at Covent Garden Market known for her resilience and business acumen, leaving behind his legal wife Adelaide Delanoy and their young son Richard Junius Booth in a highly publicized scandal that involved bigamy charges and forced Junius to pay alimony, tainting the family's reputation even as his American career flourished with tours from Boston to New Orleans, where his intense portrayals of villains like Iago and Shylock earned him $100 per performance, about $3,000 in today's terms, and comparisons to the legendary Edmund Kean, though his chronic alcoholism led to infamous incidents such as arriving drunk to rehearsals, chasing fellow actors with a prop sword during a Baltimore staging of King Lear, or impulsively freeing caged birds on stage in Philadelphia to symbolize freedom, behaviors that often required Mary Ann to intervene with apologies and bribes to theater managers. The Booth siblings formed a theatrical dynasty. The eldest, Junius Brutus Jr., born in 1821, became a solid actor and manager who oversaw San Francisco's Jenny Lind Theater during the Gold Rush and later starred in The Merchant of Venice across the West Coast. Rosalie, born 1823, a quiet, introspective woman who taught piano lessons and remained unmarried, providing emotional support to the family. Henry Byron, born 1825 but dying in infancy. Mary Ann, born 1827, who married a merchant and lived quietly. Frederick, born 1829, who succumbed to childhood illness. Elizabeth, born 1831, another early death. Edwin Thomas, born November 13, 1833, who eclipsed his father by the 1850s as America's greatest tragedian, famed for his subtle, introspective Hamlet in a record 100 consecutive nights at New York's Winter Garden Theater in 1864 to 1865, earning $20,000 annually and building a fortune through investments in oil and real estate. Asia Sidney, born 1835, John's closest sibling and confidant, who married British comedian John Sleeper Clark in 1859 and later authored the memoir The Unlocked Book, a memoir of John Wilkes Booth by his sister in 1938, defending his motives while revealing family secrets. And Joseph Adrian, born 1840, the youngest, who rejected the stage for medicine, studying at the University of Maryland but struggling with opium addiction that led to erratic careers as a doctor and farmer. Other siblings like an unnamed infant died young, leaving the family scarred by loss. In 1846, Junius purchased the farm for $12,000, and by 1851 constructed Tudor Hall, a striking Gothic Revival mansion with steeply pitched roofs, ornate bargeboards, pointed arch windows, a spacious library lined with leather-bound volumes of Shakespeare and Byron, and a drawing room for family recitals, serving as a summer haven where John roamed the 150 acres, fishing in the nearby Deer Creek and hunting rabbits with a slingshot, while winters were spent at their three-story brick townhouse on 62 North Exeter Street in Baltimore, a bustling port city of 169,000 residents alive with abolitionist meetings at Frederick Douglass's newspaper office, nativist riots by the Plug Uglies gang, and theaters like the Front Street where Junius performed to sold-out crowds. John, with his striking features, wavy black hair, piercing hazel eyes, pale complexion, and athletic 5 feet 8 inches build, attended Bel Air Academy from ages 7 to 13, a one-room schoolhouse where he excelled in physical pursuits, winning fencing matches against older boys and riding horses at breakneck speeds across the farm's pastures, demonstrating early marksmanship by shooting squirrels from 40 yards with a .22 rifle his father gifted him, but he was a distracted student, often caught daydreaming about chivalric tales from the Knights of the Round Table or reciting Julius Caesar's assassination scene to amused classmates, earning reprimands for poor penmanship and arithmetic, though his teacher noted his quick wit and dramatic flair in school plays. At age 12, During the summer of 1850 at the Harford County Fair amid stalls of apple cider and livestock auctions, a Romani fortune-teller in a colorful shawl grasped his palm, studying its lines before whispering a chilling prophecy: "You will lead a grand life, touching the lives of millions, but it will be short, doomed to a tragic end after great turmoil," words he etched into a small leather journal he carried for years, later confiding to Asia that it mirrored the fates of heroes like Joan of Arc or Spartacus, fueling his sense of predestined glory. His formal education advanced to Milton Boarding School in Sparks, Maryland, a Quaker-run academy from 1851 to 1852, where the plain gray uniforms and emphasis on silence during meals contrasted his boisterous nature, but he absorbed lessons from Paradise Lost and engaged in heated debates on slavery, siding with Southern views that it was a paternal institution, as argued by schoolmates from Virginia plantations, influenced by Maryland's status as a border state with 87,000 slaves and growing. Sectional divide. At 13, he enrolled at St. Timothy's Hall in Catonsville, an Episcopal military academy founded in 1832, where 150 cadets in gray wool uniforms drilled with Enfield rifles on the parade ground, learning tactics from the Mexican War, but Booth's rebellion, sneaking off to nearby taverns to sip ale and recite Byron's Don Juan to barmaids, or organizing unauthorized midnight fencing duels, culminated in expulsion in early 1852 for incorrigible conduct, months before Junius's death on November 30, 1852, at age 56 from dysentery contracted on a Mississippi riverboat during a tour, his body preserved in ice and returned to Baltimore for a funeral attended by 5,000, leaving Mary and with $50,000 in debts and forcing 19-year-old Edwin to tour Australia and California, remitting $500 monthly, about $15,000 today, from gold rush earnings to sustain the family, while John, now 14, took on farm duties at Tudor Hall, plowing fields with a team of oxen, tending the family's 20 slaves, whom Junius had freed in his will but who stayed as paid laborers, and secretly practicing acting in the barn, mimicking his father's guttural Richard III hunch with a makeshift cloak, coached by Asia who provided scripts and critiqued his overly fervent gestures, though he confided his fears of living in Junius's shadow, vowing to carve my own path, not echo his. Defying doubts, at 17, on August 14, 1855, Booth made his professional debut at Baltimore's Charles Street Theater as the Earl of Richmond in Richard III, billed anonymously as J. Wilkes to shield from expectations, but crippling stage fright caused him to mumble lines and trip over a prop sword, drawing hisses from the 300-person audience in the gaslit hall, a mortifying experience that left him vomiting backstage but ignited his determination. Within weeks, he joined John T. Ford's Holiday Street Theater Stock Company, a 1,200-seat venue where he earned $8 weekly, about $250 today, for minor roles like the messenger in Macbeth or a guard in King John, enduring 14-hour rehearsals 6 days a week, learning blocking, voice projection, and stage combat from veterans like Thomas Moxley, who taught him to wield a broadsword with flair, his 5 feet 8 inches frame and lithe movements earning him bit parts in melodramas like The Lady of Lyons. In 1857, at 19, he relocated to Philadelphia's Arch Street Theater under manager William Wheatley, living in a cramped $3 weekly boarding house on Sansom Street, performing in 120 shows over 40 weeks, from Laertes in Hamlet to Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet, his emotive eyes and resonant baritone noted by the Philadelphia Inquirer as ardent but needing polish, though exhaustion from back-to-back matinees and evenings led to vocal strain, treated with honey lozenges. A breakthrough arrived in February 1858 at Richmond's Marshall Theater, where, stepping in as Richard III for an ill lead, his dynamic swordplay, leaping across tables and delivering the "Now is the winter of our discontent" soliloquy with a twisted limp, drew 900 spectators nightly for 2 weeks, earning $50 per show and reviews in the Richmond Dispatch praising his fire and genius, launching him as a star. By 1859, he toured the Mid-Atlantic, Albany's Gaiety Theater, Washington's National, in roles like Pescara in The Apostate, his wardrobe of embroidered vests and silk cravats reflecting rising status. His 1860 Deep South tour, Charleston's Dock Street Theater with its chandelier-lit boxes, Savannah's Athenaeum amid cotton warehouses, Montgomery's Odd Fellows Hall where he dined with secessionist fire-eaters, New Orleans St. Charles Theater drawing Creole elites, netted $20,000 annually, about $700,000 today, rivaling Edwin's fame, his Byronic beauty, wavy black hair, mustache, 160-pound athletic build, earning swoons from ladies who sent him lockets and poems, dubbing him the handsomest man in America, in the New Orleans Picayune. Though a February 1860 rehearsal accident at Columbus's Empire Theater, when co-star Charles Thorne's loaded .44 caliber pistol misfired during a duel scene in Richard III, grazing Booth's right thigh and embedding a fragment that required surgical removal in a Montgomery hospital, sidelining him for 6 weeks and prompting opium use for pain, which he later quit but recalled as fate's warning, writing to Asia, "The gypsy spoke true, my path is marked by peril, but glory awaits." Southern society enchanted him, banquets at Alabama plantations with owners like John Winston, who gifted him a pearl-handled derringer, and discussions with Virginia legislators like Roger Pryor on states' rights, solidified his pro-slavery stance, viewing the South as a chivalric idol of honor and hierarchy threatened by Northern industrialism, as he confided in a letter to Junius Jr. "The Negro is happy in chains, Lincoln would make him a savage." By 1861, as Fort Sumter fell, Booth's politics hardened. At 16, he had attended Know-Nothing Party rallies in Baltimore's Monument Square, cheering anti-Catholic speeches amid torchlight parades, and during tours smuggled quinine, a scarce malaria drug, in his trunk's false bottom to Confederate field hospitals, aided by contacts in the Knights of the Golden Circle, a clandestine group he encountered in New Orleans' Pickwick Club, where members like attorney Judah P. Benjamin discussed annexing Cuba for slavery. Though no formal initiation is recorded, only Booth's boasts to Oliphant of secret oaths for the South. Refusing enlistment to avoid clashing with Edwin, a Unionist who voted for Lincoln in 1860 and banned John from his Booth Theater in New York after a 1861 fistfight where John called abolitionists black Republican scum, Booth performed in northern venues, Chicago's McVickers Theater with its velvet seats, Boston's Museum where he played Macbeth to 1,500 in 1862, Cleveland's Academy of Music, his acrobatic stage fights and Velvet Thunder voice lauded by the Chicago Tribune as a revelation. But his seditious rants, like praising Davis as the South's Washington in a St. Louis saloon, led to his March 1863 arrest by Provost Marshal James Barrowman for treasonous speech under General Order No. 38, detained briefly in the old Capitol prison before release on a $1,000 bond and a Union loyalty oath he derided in a letter to Ford. "I swore with fingers crossed. My heart beats for Dixie." A poignant family moment occurred on November 25, 1864, when John, Edwin, and Junius Jr. staged Julius Caesar at New York's Winter Garden for a Central Park Shakespeare statue fund, John's Mark Antony, friends, Romans, countrymen, earning a 2-minute ovation from 1,500 elite patrons including Vanderbilts and Astors, grossing $3,500. Though the night aligned with a Confederate terror plot by Jacob Thompson's agents to incinerate hotels like the Fifth Avenue and Astor House using Greek fire, a scheme Booth likely learned of through Surratt, a courier he met at Mary Surratt's Tavern, but did not participate in, as evidenced by his calm post-show supper with Edwin. Romantically volatile, Booth wooed actresses like Effie German with sonnets and diamonds, but in April 1859 in Albany's Stanwix Hall Hotel, spurned lover Henrietta Irving slashed his cheek with a dirk after discovering letters to another, requiring 12 stitches and leaving a scar he hid with makeup. In February 1865, he secretly engaged Lucy Lambert Hale, the vivacious 23-year-old daughter of New Hampshire Senator John P. Hale, an abolitionist and future minister to Spain, meeting her at Washington's National Hotel balls, exchanging passionate letters, his preserved in her diary, hers burned after the assassination, professing eternal love while concealing his treason, a union blessed by Mary Ann, who knitted Lucy a shawl, but opposed by Edwin, who warned of political poison, fearing the Hales' Union ties would tarnish the Booth name amid war. By October 1864, seething over Lincoln's re-election and the Emancipation Proclamation, which he lambasted as robbery of Southern manhood. In a fiery letter to Asia locked in her safe, Booth conceived a plot to kidnap Lincoln from Ford's Theater during the Prisoner of State or the Soldier's Home cottage, planning to spirit him south via wagon to Richmond for exchange of 10,000 Confederate prisoners or to coerce armistice, recruiting a motley crew. Michael O'Laughlin, a 25-year-old Baltimore engraver and childhood friend who served in the 1st Maryland Infantry CSA, Samuel Arnold, a 30-year-old St. Timothy's classmate and ex-Confederate private-turned-Baltimore clerk, George Atzerodt, a 30-year-old Prussian immigrant and port tobacco carriage painter known for blockade-running whiskey, Lewis Powell, alias Payne, a 20-year-old 6 feet 2 inches giant from Florida who fought with Mosby's Rangers at Gettysburg and deserted after a head wound, David Harold, a 22-year-old Georgetown-educated pharmacist's clerk with expert knowledge of Maryland backroads and hunting trails, and John Harrison Surratt Jr., a 21-year-old Confederate courier from Prince George's County whose widowed mother Mary Elizabeth Surratt's boarding house at 604 H Street NW in Washington, a 2-story brick row house with lace curtains and a parlor for secessionist meetings, served as headquarters, funded by Booth's $15,000 acting savings, oil investments in Pennsylvania yielding $500 monthly, and possibly $1,000 from Confederate agents like Jacob Thompson during Booth's October 1864 Montreal trip to the St. Lawrence Hall Hotel, where he deposited $455 in the Ontario Bank, purchased a bill of exchange, and acquired a cipher code for encrypted messages, though historians like William Tidwell in Come Retribution argue indirect Richmond backing via Judah Benjamin's Secret Service, while Edward Steers Jr. in Blood on the Moon posits Booth's independent fanaticism. A January 1865 dry run at the National Hotel failed, and a March 17 ambush on the 7th Street Road to Campbell Hospital aborted when Lincoln skipped a luncheon for the play Still Waters Run Deep, frustrating Booth, who drilled his team in swordplay at Gautier's restaurant and stored ropes, handcuffs, and chloroform in Mary Surratt's tavern cellar. After Lee's April 9 surrender at Appomattox, shattering Confederate hopes, Booth, infiltrating the White House crowd for Lincoln's April 11 speech on Reconstruction and black suffrage, muttered to Harold, "That means citizenship. By God, that's the last speech he'll ever make," and pivoted to assassination, aiming to decapitate the government by killing Lincoln, Johnson, and Seward simultaneously, assigning Powell to stab Seward at his Lafayette Square mansion, recovering from a carriage accident with a jaw splint, Atzerodt to shoot Johnson in his Kirkwood House suite, and himself to target Lincoln at Ford's Theater, with Harold escorting Powell through Washington's gaslit streets and Surratt scouting from Elmira, New York. On Good Friday, April 14, 1865, upon learning at Ford's box office from stagehand Edmund Spengler that Lincoln, Mary Todd Lincoln, Major Henry Rathbone, and his fiancée Clara Harris would attend the 8:15 p.m. performance of Our American Cousin, a British farce starring Laura Keene in her 1000th show as Florence Trenchard, Booth orchestrated the strike. At noon, he drank brandy at Talteville's Star Saloon next door, chatting with actors about Lincoln's vulgar jokes. At 2 p.m., he accessed the empty theater via his friendship with owner John Ford, drilling a 1-inch peephole in the door of State Box 7, combining boxes 7 and 8 with damask curtains and rocking chairs for the president, carving a mortise notch to wedge a 3-foot pine bar from the music stand to block entry, and testing the lock with a pocket knife. At 6 p.m., he stabled his rented bay mare Kitty, a swift 14-hand horse, in Baptist Alley behind the theater, tying her to a post with a double bridle for quick getaway, and at 7 p.m., he convened O'Laughlin, Arnold, Powell, Atzerodt, Harold, and Spengler at Gautier's saloon on Pennsylvania Avenue, assigning rolls over oysters and whiskey, pocketing his .44 caliber Philadelphia Derringer, a palm-sized brass pistol loaded with a .41 ball, an ivory-handled Bowie knife engraved Liberty, and writing in his red leather diary, "Our cause being almost lost. Something decisive and great must be done. Tonight I strike for vengeance." At 10:15 p.m., during Act 3, Scene 2, as Harry Hawk as Asa Trenchard delivered the line, "Don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal, you suckologizing old man trap," drawing laughter that masked noise, Booth entered the anteroom. Lincoln's bodyguard John Parker, a Washington policeman with a drinking problem, had left for drinks at Taltaville's with coachman Charles Forbes, barred the door with the pine brace, stepped into the dimly lit box decorated with American flags and a George Washington portrait, aimed his Derringer at Lincoln's head from 4 feet as the president laughed leaning forward, and fired, the lead ball entering behind the left ear, traversing the brain, and lodging behind the right eye, causing Lincoln to slump silently. Rathbone grappled, but Booth slashed his left arm from elbow to shoulder with the 7-inch Bowie blade, then vaulted over the railing, his right boot spur snagging the blue Treasury Guard flag, twisting his left ankle and fracturing the fibula upon landing 12 feet below on the stage, dropping the pistol but clutching the knife, shouting, "Sic semper tyrannis." Virginia's motto, "Thus always to tyrants," and reportedly, "The South is avenged," or, "I have done it," to the stunned 1,700 audience, including surgeons Charles Leal and Charles Taft, who rushed to the box, before limping across the stage past Hawk, who froze midline, exiting through the back door to Kitty, mounting despite pain, and galloping down F Street into the night as screams erupted and Mary Lincoln wailed, "They have shot the president." Powell, guided by Harold, invaded Seward's home at 10 p.m., pistol-whipping son Frederick, slashing servant George Bell, and stabbing the secretary 5 times in the face and neck. Seward survived due to a metal jaw splint from his April 5 carriage accident, before fleeing bloodied. Atzerodt, after drinking at the Kirkwood bar, discarded his knife in a gutter and fled to Georgetown without entering Johnson's room, sabotaging the plot's scope. Booth and Harold, reuniting at midnight on the Navy Yard Bridge where sentry Silas Cobb unwittingly let them pass despite curfew, rode 13 miles southeast through muddy roads to Surrattsville, now Clinton, arriving at 12:30 a.m. at Mary Surratt's Tavern leased to John Lloyd, retrieving the Spencer carbine, ammunition belt, field glasses, and whiskey hidden weeks earlier, then pressed 9 miles south to drive Samuel Alexander Mudd's 2-story frame house near Bryantown, a 35-year-old physician and tobacco farmer Booth had met in November 1864 at St. Mary's Church to buy a horse and discuss Confederate escapes. Knocking at 4 a.m., Mudd, in nightshirt, examined the swollen leg by candlelight, diagnosing a fibula fracture 2 inches above the ankle, cutting Booth's boot with a pocketknife, splinting it with cedar shingles and yarn bandages, providing crutches carved from a broomstick, and sheltering them in an upstairs bedroom until evening, feeding them cornbread and eggs, later claiming ignorance of the assassination despite newspapers arriving by noon, a denial that led to his 1865 conspiracy conviction and life sentence at Fort Jefferson, pardoned in 1869. As Lincoln died at 7:22 a.m. in Peterson House across from Ford's, convulsing for 9 hours under Leal's care, news ignited national fury, flags at half-mast, churches tolling bells, mobs attacking secessionist homes in Philadelphia, and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton launched a $100,000 reward manhunt, $2 million today, with 10,000 troops, 300 detectives, and Lafayette Baker's National Detective Police scouring Maryland's swamps, distributing 20,000 wanted posters describing Booth's slender build, black hair, pale face, mustache. Booth and Harold hid April 15 to 20 in Zekiah Swamp's dense pine thicket near Pope's Creek, a mosquito-infested morass of quicksand and brackish water, guided by Confederate agent Thomas A. Jones, brother-in-law of Samuel Cox, who supplied hardtack, ham, and newspapers via signals with a white handkerchief, Booth reading condemnations like the New York Times calling him a fiend incarnate, and even the Richmond Whig denouncing the act as barbarous, devastating him as he expected a claim like tyrannicide, prompting diary entries on torn ledger pages. "I struck boldly for my country and that bitch goddess, liberty, but they brand me murderer, God judge me." Shaving his mustache with scissors to disguise as a wounded rebel, enduring fever and throbbing pain treated with whiskey soaks, they crossed the Potomac on April 20 in Jones's 12-foot skiff under moonlight, oaring 4 hours but initially landing back in Maryland before correcting to Virginia's Machadoc Creek on April 23, seeking shelter from Dr. Richard Stewart, a Confederate surgeon who refused entry but provided cornbread and directed them to the cabin of freed black ferryman William Lucas, near King George Courthouse, where they paid $10 to sleep in his one-room shack, displacing Lucas's family at gunpoint, then rode Lucas's wagon to the Rappahannock River Ferry at Port Conway on April 24, where operator Willie Jett, a 18-year-old Confederate veteran romancing the innkeeper's daughter, ferried them across and led them to Richard H. Garrett's 200-acre tobacco farm near Port Royal, 3 miles south, where Booth posed as James W. Boyd, a wounded soldier from Aiken's partisan Rangers, and Harold as his brother, David E. Boyd, initially welcomed with ham supper and tobacco but growing suspicious when Garrett's son heard of the $200,000 reward, inflated rumor, locking them in the tobacco barn filled with hay and curing racks after Booth refused to surrender his weapons, fearing theft. On April 26, at 2 a.m., Lieutenant Edward Dougherty's 26-man detachment from the 16th New York Cavalry, tipped by jet under interrogation at the Star Hotel, "They're at Garrett's, but swear you didn't hear it from me," surrounded the barn. Dougherty demanded surrender. Harold emerged trembling after 30 minutes, hands up, but Booth, barricaded behind crates with his carbine cocked and revolvers loaded, shouted, "I'll die before I surrender. Draw up your men and fight like gentlemen," as detective. Everton Conger and Luther Baker set the barn ablaze with hay torches, flames licking the walls, peering through slats. Sergeant Thomas Boston Corbett, a fanatical Christian soldier who had castrated himself to avoid temptation, defied orders to take alive and fired his Colt revolver through a crack, the .36 caliber ball striking Booth in the neck, severing the spinal cord at the C4 vertebra, paralyzing him from the neck down. Dragged on a hay mattress to the Garrett porch under a locust tree, Booth gasped for air as blood pooled, requesting water sponged on his lips, to raise his hands, useless, useless, and whispering to Baker, "Tell my mother I die for my country. I did what I thought was best," expiring at dawn around 7:15 a.m. at age 26, his eyes glazing as the sun rose. His body, wrapped in a gray blanket with eyes propped open for identification photos, was searched yielding the diary, a compass, $150 in greenbacks, Lucy Hale's amber-type photo, and 5 cartes de visite of actresses including Fanny Brown, transported by wagon to Belle Plaine, then steamer to Washington aboard the USS Montauk, autopsied by Surgeon General Joseph K. Barnes, revealing the bullet's path grazing the vertebrae and causing asphyxia, positively identified by the JWB initials tattooed on his left hand in India ink from a childhood dare and a 1864 dental filling by Drive William Merrill, then sewn into a gunny sack, buried in a storage room at the old Arsenal Penitentiary, now Fort Leslie McNair, under a flagstone to prevent relic hunters, transferred in 1867 to a warehouse, and finally released in February 1869 to Mary Ann, reinterred in an unmarked grave at Baltimore's Green Mount Cemetery beside Junius and siblings, though conspiracy theories, sparked by 1869 claims of his survival and Edwin's receipt of a mummified body in 1877, or 1903 suicide of Enid, Oklahoma's David E. George, who confessed as Booth on his deathbed, his body toured as a carnival exhibit until the 1940s, persisted, prompting 1995 exhumation petitions for DNA comparison with Edwin's vertebrae at the Smithsonian, denied by court citing desecration risks, with historians like Michael Kaufman in American Brutus dismissing escapes as folklore, affirmed by the diary's handwriting match and personal effects like his signet ring engraved JWB. Booth's downfall arose from a series of fatal missteps fueled by arrogance, poor planning, and delusional ideology. Foremost was ditching a potentially executable kidnapping scheme, rehearsed with ropes and safe houses, for a rushed triple assassination without robust backups or vetted recruits, underestimating the Union's swift, massive response with 10,000 troops, 300 detectives under Lafayette Baker, and a $100,000 bounty that turned informants like Jet. His dramatic leap from the box, intended for theatrical flair, fractured his fibula on the flag, hobbling him and necessitating Mudd's aid, which created a traceable path via witnesses like Mudd's farmhand who noted the strangers. Relying on a loose cadre of amateurs, Atzerott's alcohol-fueled cowardice abandoning Johnson, Powell's sloppy attack failing to kill Seward despite 5 stabs, undermined the plot's goal of governmental collapse, leaving only Lincoln dead and the Union intact under Johnson. His overdependence on a fragile network of sympathizers, Stuart's cold refusal of shelter, Garrett's growing suspicion leading to the barn lockup, exposed him, compounded by navigational errors like the Potomac miscrossing that delayed escape by days. Profoundly, he misgauged public sentiment, anticipating heroic acclaim as a Southern Brutus, but facing revulsion even from Confederates like the Richmond Whig, labeling it a calamity, isolating him in the swamp with no aid network, as his diary's self-aggrandizing entries, equating himself to Tell or Brutus and justifying tyranny's end, revealed a narcissistic blindness to consequences, ensuring his rapid capture and death within 12 days, transforming a matinee idol into history's reviled assassin.